Our first speaker to go is Dr. Dipti Meda, who is the Director and Consultant of Cornea and Refractive Surgery from Karthik Nethralaya. And she's going to talk on a very important topic, fine-tuning the understanding of topographic clues and its impact on decision-taking in refractive surgery. On to you, Dipti.
Thank you, Chitra ma'am. Hello and welcome all of you. So this topic, when madam gave me, I think it was very interestingly named, which said fine-tuning and understanding of topography. So I had to really think and see what different I can do other than the routine interpretation. So I thought I'll just brush through quickly on the basics, but what I tried to compile is around 7 cases where actually were out of the box and the topography clues or something beyond the normal which we thought really helped us change our management. So I think each of these cases would give us some take-home point as to how subtly we can look at the maps, especially in refractive surgery. So most of my presentation today would be based on the Pentacam, but whatever machine you're using, I think the concepts remain the same. So I think majority of refractive surgeons have seen the advantage of looking at your posterior elevation. So I think that is sort of become a gold standard, but I do know of very good refractive surgeons who do on a Placido base. That's just fine until you understand the machine you are using. But for probably a youngster or a beginner, I think looking at the posterior curvature and the elevation and pachymetry are much needed in today's practice. So a simple example for why so was this 23-year-old gentleman who had a gross anisometropia who came for refractive solution. So I've just closed the posterior part because when you're looking at a Placido, this is what you see. You see the front, you look at the sagittal curvatures, you look at the K1, K2, and pretty much okay, certainly a little against the rule, but it looks pretty much okay. But when you reveal the posterior surface, there's a huge crater on the posterior elevation. So I had never seen something like this. This is not a keratoconus because your anterior elevation is perfectly normal and posterior you have almost plus 90. So actually this is a case of true posterior keratoconus and the other eye was absolutely normal. So something surely I will have to report. So this would be totally missed if you had done a Placido's imaging. So on the Pentacam you have a lot of maps, but this is generally what you see as a printout. That's the quad map. So I think to not miss subtle things, diagnosing a keratoconus is very simple. Anyone would do it. But what we are looking here, it is to not miss the subtle signs of FFKC when you're doing a refractive screening. So I think dividing your maps of whatever investigation you do is very important, especially if you're in a busy OPD, you would not want to miss a small island. So always divide your map into few preset thoughts, and this is how generally I go about. So I always see the elevation first, divide it into looking at the pattern and looking at the numbers. I don't have to go through this, all of us know these cutoffs. Then you look at the curvature map, look at the pattern and look at these important numbers of 22 degrees skewing and 1.5, 2.5 steepening. Then pachymetry often missed are the patterns. Usually we'll just look at the thinnest and other things, but pattern is something which is described very well today. Especially Dr. Professor Sinjap has given very good patterns of dome shape, bell shape, and this concept of migration of the thinnest point is certainly a very early sign and we need to look at that. And that can come only when you study the pattern, not only the numbers. And we end it with the keratoconic indices and obviously the Bellin-Ambrosio if your software is giving you. So if you divide your Pentacam or any diagnosis into such things, it's very... So starting with case 1, so this was a patient, a 30-year-old who had stopped wearing contact lens 10 days back, which is usually a protocol, with a very stable refraction. Now what am I seeing here? My elevations and pachymetry are perfectly fine, but there is a steepening of the superior cornea both in the right and left eye. So this is a very common scenario all of us face, and this is because of contact lenses. So though she has stopped lenses for 10 days, I further continue stopping it for 2 more weeks, and certainly it's smoothened out, and another 2 more weeks it's smoothened out. So we have to be aware of this called Warpage because many of our refractive patients are on contact lenses already. So though we assume 1 week is a studies in literature that shows that it can last as long as 5 weeks. So you should be aware of the subtle clues of a warpage, and mostly it is superior steepening. And if you consider this as an uneven cornea and planar contour or any topo guided, you will be causing more harm. So always make sure the cornea is perfectly smooth in a contact lens mirror, give enough time, and then only take up for your surgery. So this is not a related case, but I just wanted to highlight it. This was a gentleman, 60-year-old, keen on multifocal. So we did his pentacam just to make sure his cornea is fine. The elevation were fine, but the on the curvature maps. So we gave him some time after days the curves had come. So what exactly was this? This was basically a breach in our protocol. So the optometrist had done a contact biometry and then had sent to the pentacam, which was causing almost a 6th diopter flattening. So it's not that the cornea is flattened by 6th diopter, but probably the epithelium, which has been slightly irregular, or the tears, has caused this. So it's extremely important. So why these two cases is to say any optical topography or anything has to be done when the cornea is in the most virgin state. So make sure your cornea is untouched, and we also avoid usage of lubricating drops if your natural tears are good. So don't even put that. No paracaine, nothing before you do these topographic signs, because each of these can cause a lot of changes in the surface. So though we say elevation based pentacam are not affected, I have seen a lot of times that even a small thing can affect even your pentacam or even the most advanced. So this paper I found, which was very interesting, in the cornea, where they studied just the rub of the eye 5 minutes before your pentacam or topography, how much it can change. So there are changes in your astigmatism, there are changes in your keratoconic indices just by rubbing of your eyes. So that delicate people's cornea can be. So I think that's very important. You prepare the patient even before you call him for your pre-LASIK scans. So that was the first take-home message. Now the second case. So this patient certainly looks very abnormal. He came with keratoconic, was diagnosed as keratoconus and came for an opinion. So let me start from the sagittal curvature. There is steepening superiorly. Same spot I have a thinned out cornea, 393. And when I go up at the back elevation, certainly highly elevated, around 52. And only thing different is the front elevation. There are a little elevated spots, but they're not exactly matching. Now, when I go to the Bellin-Ambrosio, again, lot of red marks, which shows this is a highly abnormal cornea. So is it a superior keratoconus? Not actually. This was a scarred cornea. It's a macular grade scar, which was missed by the previous clinician. And this was what was causing all the pictures of a keratoconus. So it's tough to miss such big scars, but often you would have these mild adenoviral scar or, keratoconjunctivitis scar in refractive patients, and that can cause that local abnormality. So if that is not be picked, probably we'll just be, not giving the advantage of refractive surgery to these patients just by misdiagnosing it as keratoconus. So it's very important you do a very good clinical examination to not miss those nebular scars. And if it is there, expect the topographic changes, and you could very well go ahead with the topo-guided treatment. So like in visual fields, we always say, I think in every topography, you just cannot diagnose anything without a good clinical correlation. So these are other two maps. Upper one has a small irregularity. The lower map looks almost like a keratoconus. Again, these are eyes with scars. So subtle scar in your refractive patients certainly is something you have to see. And scars behave very unusually. The previous case, the scarred area was steep, and in this case, the scar area is flat. So the collagen just shrinks and there's no proper correlation. So anything we are seeing out of the box, please go put a high beam, high illumination, and ensure you have not missed any scars or any surface irregularities. Now coming to my next case, so this was a patient who walked in with a Placido-based imaging. He had visited elsewhere for LASIK and was diagnosed as keratoconus, and he was avoided the advantage of it, and he came for a second opinion. So obviously this looks like a keratoconic cornea. There is all the signs that you would want to see. What really thought we should do something more is the cornea was extremely clear, and the retinoscope was giving a perfect glow. So we rely a lot on the retinoscopes. Our optometrists pick very early FF cases just by the split of the early keratoconus. So this person had a very crisp glow, and I just couldn't believe that this cornea could have a crisp glow. Another thing was the astigmatism was almost 3 on the topography, and he was accepting just 0.5. So we still went ahead and did a Placido and a Pentacam at our place. So this is how the Pentacam looked. So there is an inferior steepening in the sagittal curvature, but everything else was not looking like a keratoconus. The thinning was on the superior part, the elevations were abnormal in the superior part. So what can the differential diagnosis be? Could it be a scar like my previous case? No, because I had examined him. Another reason you could get this, if the patient is not fixating, if he's moved his eye. But usually such ones are picked by abnormal quality score. Quality score of the Pentacam is very sensitive. So if the patient has moved, that would surely be LO. But this was very repeatable, same lesions all the time, and the QS was always okay. So then we walk up to the machine. BAD also is highly abnormal. So this is what we saw. The Placido is certainly much lower, not at the center of the cornea. And that is the reason why you were getting such abnormal scans. But I still don't know how it was so repeatable. That is when we went and looked at his fixation. So this patient had a very gross parafoveal eccentric fixation. So he was targeting. Yeah. So he was looking at the target, but just that his target, his macula itself, his foveal point was not seeing. So that is the reason it had such a steady, repeatable scans, which were highly abnormal. So you can also do that on your Pentacam. You can go to the overview map and you can actually see where the patient is fixating. So here you see that he is fixating above the target. So that is the reason you're getting such repeatable abnormal scans. So whenever this happens because of an eye movement, then the QS would pick it up. So then what you do is repeat the scan after training your patient, and usually the maps would settle down. But this was a very interesting case which taught us a lot of things. So let me not go through this. This is basically to show that you have a lot of fixation, especially if you're doing a pre-LASIK testing, 2-3 machines, the patients do get confused. So make sure you educate them what is your target light, and especially in the Pentacam, the camera moves. So it's very important to tell them not to move their eye to get a perfect image. So acquisition is as important as interpretation. So we need to train our technician, educate our patients, and also keenly observe to look at such errors. So the next case, let me start with the BAD. So this was a VIP, son of a doctor. So this BAD certainly didn't make me happy. He was very interested in LASIK. So looking at this, you would expect a lot of changes in your quad map, but surprisingly, his quad map was absolutely normal. Elevation, topography, Pachy, everything. So why was he behaving such? So one clue what we got was the AC depth, which was a very shallow AC, 2.3. So we went and did his manual white to white and also on the Pentacam. So this showed he had a very small cornea. So it was around 9.7. So then we had to scratch our head, and that's when we realized that we just looked at the database the Bellin uses. So the Bellin Ambrosia uses a normal cornea normative to create his normative data. So obviously this person who has a small cornea, the entire change of the progression of the pachymetry is crumpled in a smaller area. So obviously your progressive maps comes down. So that's the reason we realized, though you know it is normal, but you cannot go ahead with LASIK, especially in a VIP if you're having so many red signals. So then we understood the reason. We explained it to them that this is going to come abnormal, but your cornea is absolutely fine. So we went ahead with a surface ablation, and he's doing perfectly fine. I think it's more than 3 to 5 years. So it's very important, whatever best technology you're using, understand the basics of it, understand how the normative data was created, because you'll always have these patients who will not fit into that, and you shouldn't be depriving them of their refractive surgeries. So it's very important. Then when we looked at literature, there were few studies which did show that eyes with smaller corneal diameter had a unreliable BAD. So there we had an answer, and we were a little more confident in going ahead with the surgery. So the next case would be...
I'm a little unsure. Mr. Sharik, she has still time?
Ma'am, I have already intimated ma'am that she has already passed 3-4 minutes.
Okay, fine, ma'am. Then let me just cut it through. So I think there were two other cases, but similar ones. But what I would want to say is, I think whatever technology you're using, it's very important to understand the basics of it. And a single printout would not be enough. So anyone who's keenly into refractive practice, I think we should get the machine in with us. We should look at the smaller things, and just getting a print from some other place would be good. But if you really want to do justice, I think we should have the machine, or at least have an access to view the prints later and do your analysis. We need to keep our minds open, always clinically correlate. There always are these cases which are out of the box, and whichever machine we have, whatever best it is, there are always normal variants which fall out of the box. So it's very important we understand and diagnose these patients rightly. We don't want to miss a keratoconus, nor we want to overdiagnose a case of keratoconus. So in refractive surgery, our mantra has always been, whenever in doubt, give some time, give some space, speak to your patient, and if still doubtful, just withhold the refractive surgery, and there are a lot of other options. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Dipti. You brought out a lot of things to think about. Before we go on to the discussion, I think all of us, all the speakers have 10 minutes time. And at the 9th minute, Mr. Sharik will give you all a warning that you have 1 minute left, and try to your best to wrap it up after that. So I would take some questions and Dr. Praveen would be asking, and then we look forward to our expert panel answering, but I want our speakers also to be involved, and because we have the best of them here to give, you could raise some thoughts so that the attendees gain a lot. So it's a very straightforward question. I have Namrata, you're there, Kumar is there. Is Dr. Sonu Goel, have you joined in? Get to join, I think. Okay, now if you get this inferior superior asymmetry when all the other parameters are normal, and you take your time and then again do a repeat after ensuring that all the other common issues are not there into consideration, and you still continue to get that inferior superior asymmetry in the sagittal curvature map, the other things are normal. So what would you do in such a situation? Would you wait, or would you continue to monitor your patients, or would you decide to do an extra procedure, or you would say nothing on the cornea, you would do phakic IOL depending on the thickness or the amount of refractive error? Question, Kumar or Namrata, anybody?
So if there is an inferior superior asymmetry, I think we are not, I mean, I'm not a great this thing of extra procedure, so I don't think I will do that, but I would ask the patient to wait and then, you know, again see, say after 6 months or so, how it goes by. And if the pachymetry is, you're saying normal pachymetry, because pachymetry is a very important thing again.
Yes.
Yeah. In this case, suppose the pachymetry is say 560, 570, then I think you really don't have to this thing too much. But if the pachymetry is sub 500 in 400s, then of course you would need to correlate. But I would not go ahead and do the refractive procedure, you know, immediately.
Dr. Kumar, would you, what's your cutoff for an abnormal bad value? Would you give importance to each of the sub D values also? Are you there? Kumar? He's not there?
Oh. You can see him there, but I think that
others have not joined in. Okay. Dr. Sonu Goel. It's not there. So the question goes to you again. It's a very straightforward.
Bad value, I think, is something that should be considered, and D value should be considered. But I would rather give the D value composite more value. I mean, more. I would attach more weightage to it rather than the, you know, sub values.
Dr. Praveen, could you ask some before I take some more?
We have only one expert in the expert panel, Dr. Namrata.
So you are also, Praveen, you are also an expert, and so is Chitra. All the other speakers also, for that matter.
No. Ramuti has
come. I mean, for anyone.
is there, you can ask him as well. I mean, all of them, I'm sure, will.
No, all of us are very much there. I don't know what has happened. Yeah.
No, what I was saying was, what I was saying was, I mean, that's a very interesting perspective about things that could appear abnormal on even a machine that is commonly known as probably one of the gold standards for topography. simply because this machine is built to pick up keratoconus and built to pick up abnormalities for refractive surgery, is not built to pick up the rare conditions. So I think very important point that Deepti made, that this is not a substitute for a good clinical examination. And a good clinical examination, you'll still pick up more things on that might not be seen on topography. But then again, I think anybody, Dr. Vavikar, Chitra, Namrata, anybody, what is it that if you see on topography will make you go back and look at the slit lamp of the patient's cornea from the perspective of, hey, this looks odd. This is not keratoconus, nor is this something that follows normal patterns. What kind of thing would prompt you to go back and look at the slit lamp?
I suppose if there is some thinning superiorly, but not in the typical area of keratoconus, and it is something which shows in the Pachy also and shows in the other floats also, then you start thinking there's some nebular opacity only which is there, nothing serious. And then you go back and look, and many a situation it could be just a patient, as she said, not keeping the chin rest, the head tilt, and all these things can bring in those issues. So
I think if your steeper part of the keratometry or your keratometric map or your values which are there, your curvature doesn't correlate with the pachymetry, and the thinnest part is not exactly the steepest or steep. I mean, there is a mismatch somewhere, between the two, even while you're just looking at the maps, then you would immediately go back to the slit lamp and confirm, whether it is really thinned out or are there anything else that, we've missed out. I think Deepti gave a great presentation that way with examples, showing what all could go wrong, especially the small cornea. Small cornea was small. But if you notice, the cornea was thick also. It was about 570 plus. So I think everything needs to fit into that jigsaw puzzle. And the moment there's something amiss, that is, when you have to go back and correlate.
True.
As far as this OBSCAN is concerned, I think most of us have Pentacam, but in some practices, if at all, yes, still having OBSCAN. What is this, the values we need to remember that tend to show a thicker value in pachymetry as against Pentacam. And the other thing which you also need to keep in mind is sometimes because it extrapolates the values of the posterior cornea. So sometimes it overestimates ectasia. So is there anything else which you think we need to keep in mind when we are looking at an OBSCAN topography map when it comes to us? Anything?
You summarized, Chitra, very nicely. Everything.
Can I add one point, Chitra? I think one of the examples that Deepti had showed as well, and this is universal across all topography machines. If the area of the abnormality in general lies in different positions in different maps, say, for example, the pachymetry map is showing thinning in a separate area versus the steepening is in a separate area again. That again seems to be like a red flag from the point of view of this is not something that is normal on topography. Because typically, whatever abnormalities you'll find in the same particular area, if it's because of a cone or inferior steepening, but if it's in different areas, then you probably would like to go and look at it.
Yeah. Another thing I think which Deepti also pointed out and which is really relevant is that all the Pentacam values are, on normative data of the Western population, not exactly, on Indianized, although we go by the same figures. And they were trying to collect normative data for Indian subcontinent also. I think, Praveen, your center was a part of it and our center is a part of it. But that's something, again, which you need to look at, because all the data that comes into it is from normative data, which is generated from the Western.
There's one last question I have. Of course, Praveen has more we could ask before we move on. Like supposing you check the anterior chamber depth value when you're talking of phakic IOLs, and Pentacam gives a little suspicious, and a little less than normal value. How would you interpret it? Would you look at the IOL master, or would you believe that IOL master gives higher values which are not reliable? And if you actually have a number of modalities, which would be considered as most reliable for anterior chamber depth measurement? Ramurthy, you've joined, can you tell us?
Poor Ramamurthy, as soon as he joined, he had a question fired at him.
Sorry, I really don't know the thread of what was going on. I just came in. But as specifically regarding your last question, the ultrasound day scan is considered to be the gold standard, surprisingly. And most other modalities are compared with that. And at least as far as the anterior chamber depth is concerned. And I believe that unlike in white-to-white measurements, where we know that the laser interference biometry instruments do not give that accurate measurement, I think as far as AC depth is concerned, maybe the biometers are more reliable rather than the other equipments that we have, like the Scheimpflug imaging systems. But as of now, if any of the systems show me that the AC depth is 2.7, 2.75, anything that is somewhat abnormal, I would not go to multiple instruments and find something which is giving me a slightly better reading and go ahead and implant a phakic intraocular lens. I'd rather play it safe and avoid a lens.
Dr.
I don't know whether I've answered your question or whether some other concept somebody can say.
Anybody has any difference in thinking along these lines?
No, I think when we analyzed our own ICL or phakic IOL data, what we found was that in the early parts, we were measuring with almost everything, including UBM, manual wide-to-wide, biometry of two kinds, Lenstar, IOL Master 700, this, that, so many things. And eventually, when we filtered out everything, what we found in our hands was that the biometer works best for all readings, not just the anterior chamber depth, but we found that our wide-to-wide calculations were also almost always more accurate when we use the wide-to-wide of the biometer compared to whenever we use from the UBM or from the ASOCT or things. Because all of these other imaging devices are relatively little more difficult, cumbersome, and technically challenging to acquire accurately in all eyes nicely. So as a rule, we are following the biometer as probably the gold standard or primary instrument to look at, and maybe a secondary instrument to collaborate would be any of the other instruments.
You mean to say you would rely on IOL Master for anterior chamber depth? You don't think it is a little higher value?
We rely on the Lenstar, which also gives the aqueous depth. So Lenstar is my favorite. Yeah.
I would agree with you, Shell, as far as the AC depth is concerned. But if you're talking about white-to-white, all these biometers, whether it's laser interference or OCLR, whatever be the principle, or even the latest IOL Master 700, all of them measure from sclera to sclera. And what we need in the case of white-to-white measurement for a phakic IOL is mid-limbus to mid-limbus. And that's the reason that invariably all these biometers give about 0.3 to 0.35 millimeters more than what you would get with a Scheimpflug based measurement, and even with your digital calipers. So I would strongly stay away from a white-to-white measurement from any biometer. But as far as the AC depth is concerned, I would tend to agree with you.
Yeah, and sir, that's an absolutely perfect point, and that's why I think also STAR, at least as far as I know, has a sort of algorithm that if you're using the wide-to-wide from the Lenstar, you deduct it by 0.3 when you add it into the calculator. If you're doing it for IOL Master 700, deduct this much. So based on, I don't think it's published, but that's what their normative database from the different machines, they sort of give us the algorithm that for this particular machine, if you're measuring it, generally it's likely to be higher. So choose 0.3 less or something like that. But I think your point is perfect.
Great discussions.
Ma'am, can I just add one last point?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, like Dr. Praveen rightly said, I think that for that question of not correlating all the points, but also another very important thing, Dr. Praveen, is whenever there is a scar, I've always seen the QS is never going to be white because there's always going to be a little scatter and data loss. And there was a case, probably I can show it in the end, is whenever that happens, you will be amazed to see the edge detection points. So if you go to the overview, it will actually show us the edge detection points. So I have a case of, I think, 100 diopters of cornea, which was showing 450 microns. So you go to the edge detection, it is showing the shadow. It is taking the posterior surface as the shadow. So actually, when I manually measure, it was just 270 microns. So Pentacam is showing 450. So I think QS is very important. Only if your cornea is optically clear, you're going to get a white. So that could be a good clue to go and check in a little more elaborately.